This morning I'd like to talk about suffering. People talk about pain and suffering in the same breath, but pain and suffering are not the same thing. They're related, but one does not necessarily automatically mean the other. Simply put, pain is a natural part of being alive. It's going to happen from time to time at various levels. There can be emotional pain, there can be physical pain, there can be intellectual pain of sorts, and yet suffering is not necessarily part of life. We can have pain that we don't suffer. Basically, suffering requires attachment. So if we are attached to not having pain, or attached to having pleasure even, then when we don't have that which we are attached to, then we suffer. So I've had two experiences of this that have taught me well. One was I broke and dislocated my neck, and of course I was attached to the idea of walking and moving my arms, which I nearly wasn't going to be able to do if I'd severed my spinal column at my neck. That didn't happen, and that wasn't my main lesson. Believe it or not, the main lesson came from the pain after the surgery was successful. I had a lot of pain in my shoulders, especially the right shoulder and back, and it was chronic. It was chronic for many months. At first I took painkillers on every 4 hours on the clock because I was attached to having less pain, and I was suffering the pain terribly. And it took me several months of suffering this chronic pain before somehow it occurred to me that it wasn't doing me any good to think about not having this pain, being attached to the idea of having a pain-free right shoulder. And there was a shift. It was fairly sudden, whereby I stopped being attached to the idea of being pain-free, and I stopped suffering that pain. I still had the pain, but it wasn't nearly as difficult to live with because I wasn't constantly comparing it to pain-free life. I wasn't constantly trying to imagine solutions. I still sought relief through various modalities of healing, but I wasn't attached to them giving me release at any particular point in the future. I just did them without attachment, and the suffering basically went away. The other little anecdote I have about suffering in my own life, I developed tinnitus. That's just a fancy name for ringing in the ears, a high-pitched tone or ringing that plagues many, many people. And when I developed it, I had the doctor diagnose it, found out it was one of these problems that just has a fancy name. They don't know what it's caused by. They don't know how to alleviate it, heal it. So you just live with it. And I suffered tinnitus for at least several weeks, a couple of months. And then I realized somehow that I just had to accept it. And amazingly, most of the time I don't hear that high-pitched tone. Now, as I speak about it, I hear it because I'm thinking about it. And when I'm not thinking about it, when I'm just sitting in silent meditation, for example, on my usual, I don't hear it anymore. That high-pitched tone has become the new silence for me. And it's somehow the mind just stops paying attention to what is always present. It's not unusual, and therefore, not only do I not suffer it, I don't even hear it. So, it's important to recognize the quality of life when we can live without attachment. And just in terms of pain, it can be immense, the difference, because, like I say, pain happens every day, or not every day, but in some forms. And attachment to anything can cause us suffering. Attachment to a loved one. We love them dearly, but do we feel that we're just going to perish if they, God forbid, die or suddenly leave us and are no longer in our lives? Will we suffer their loss? Well, maybe it's natural to do so for a certain period of mourning, but we don't need to suffer. It's a decision to suffer. It's not usually a conscious decision, but as we raise our consciousness through various spiritual practices, we become better and better able to recognize our attachments and just release them, let them go. And when we let the attachments go, it's much easier to weather a loss of some aspect of our lives because we're not dependent or attached to that thing that we've lost. So attachment to ideas is another challenge that perhaps is even more challenging in some ways to releasing attachments to pain-free life, physical pain. We have certain ideas that we feel are they're just right. They make sense to us in some way, and other ideas and behaviors, we don't even have a rational explanation for them, but we're attached to them nonetheless. And these are even more perplexing. And yet, they're only perplexing if you contemplate them and bring them into your consciousness, raise your consciousness enough so that you even see that you have some inexplicable ideas or behaviors. So, if we can recognize what we're attached to, whether it be a particular idea or a particular level of comfort, then we can work towards releasing the attachments that inevitably will cause us suffering at some point. So if you've resonated with some part of this video, please give me a thumbs up down below and subscribe to my channel for future videos if you haven't already. And please leave comments and questions so that I can craft these videos better to serve you.